Okay, we're back on this second live stream just because, for whatever reason, on the last live stream, the camera froze and it wouldn't let me reboot basically the live stream without restarting it. So we're doing it again. We had some questions on the last live stream that I'll go into more details, but if you have any questions regarding anything sculpting process, this one is a sculpture of Christ, so if you have any questions regarding my Christian beliefs, I'd be happy to talk about those, or any other questions. This is just kind of an open Q&A. Anything, any questions that you have, feel free to ask those. Let me move this around. Let's see. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Oh, there we go. It's going to take me a sec to get going. Okay. All right. Somebody saying looks super cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's coming along slowly, so I'll probably be working mostly in the drapery, but maybe a little bit in the upper body, the arms, and maybe the hair. We'll see what I get to, but I'm gonna start just on the drapery, just because that's a little bit easier to do, or I should say, just because it's something that needs to be done. Actually, let's do the upper arm work, because there was a question during the last live stream that we just had to end because some technical difficulties. Somebody was asking, how do you go about adding the muscles and then making it look kind of natural and soft? And I think that's a good thing to talk about, and we can try to do some of that here with maybe the arm over here. Let me turn things so that you guys can see what's happening here with the muscles of the arm. Let me just make sure that everything looks good. And that we're in focus. So here you can see that I've just kind of roughed out what's happening with the arm. And very, very sketchy at this point, where it's just me putting in pieces of clay. I'm going to also switch the references so that I can see an angle of my arm, kind of a similar angle. And with what I'm seeing, it's very relaxed. I'm actually going to thin this down a little bit, because we probably don't want it overly muscular. The musculature shouldn't be distracting from it, and I think right now it's maybe a little bit too much. That's what happens when you use yourself as a reference and you accidentally just make it way too muscular. Just one of the difficulties that us in the ripped community suffer from. Just one of the ripped artists suffer from this dysmorphia, where they accidentally make all of their artwork overly muscular or overly defined. So basically what I'm going to do is, once I have the basic forms in place, and I'll still probably remove some material here and there where I need to, but I'm just going to start softening the forms with the tools and trying to blend the forms together in a way that's representative of what I'm seeing from the reference. So just kind of blending across the form, usually coming across the form. Sometimes I like to have a knife, though this one is a little bit messy. Let me clean this. Somebody's asking, where do you get a good sculpture stand from? I build my own sculpture stands, and there's some videos on the building sculpture stands on the Proco 3D YouTube channel if you're interested. And so I recommend checking those out. And that's what I use. What I like to use is my own stands, just because it's I think a better way to go about it than buying a stand every time you need one. Is making monster easier than sculpting? Making a monster easier than sculpting a person, or harder? I'd say it's probably easier when you're doing something that's more fantasy based, just because you have more leeway. It's not like a specific person, especially if it's, well, but you still have to have an understanding of how animals, like for example, if you're doing a werewolf or something like that, or if you're doing a dragon or an orc or something like that, you can have some fun with the characteristics, and you can have some, you can change things up a little bit, but you can't do it in a way that feels unrealistic. You have to have an understanding of, how noses exist in people and in animals, and then you can kind of morph those into like an orc that maybe has a nose that's more similar to that of I don't know, of whatever it is, a pig, or a rat, or you can take these things and combine them, but you have to have an understanding of things that we're already familiar with, and then you have to be able to represent those in a way that makes sense in our mind, and that just comes with practice and with observation. And but I do think it's a little bit easier than just sculpting a specific person and trying to get a likeness of that person, which is, I think, the most difficult task an artist can do. And I imagine that most like VFX or character artists that come up with that do sculpt for these characters or invent things, that they would agree that it's a little bit easier to do that than sculpting a specific person trying to get a likeness. Have you ever thought about making a wood heater for the art studio? Yeah. So I'd like to get a wood stove, just that I can use. I've kind of I started making one, actually, but the mortar that I used to put some of the bricks together, it was old, or something went wrong with the mortar where it didn't set up properly, and it was a mortar that was like pre-mixed, so it said just add water and it should be fine, but I did that and it didn't end up working, so I either need to redo that project or purchase a wood stove that I can hook up. But that is something I'd like to do for the sculpture studio that I'm working on. But I don't know when I'll get to that. But I guess I should pretty soon, because it's about to get really cold, and I'd like to still be able to do some work in that studio, at least to get it ready. So that is something that I've been thinking about. Well, that's been a big project, taking a lot of time out of my schedule, and I miss doing things like these live streams where I can show you guys some technique and do videos or things like that. But sometimes it is nice to just get a break. So I was doing the hand sculpting course before, so a lot of my day was just editing, and I think I needed a break from that. And there's something about building that, I'm just kind of basically doing construction in this barn, converting it into a sculpture studio. And that process has been very, I guess you could call it therapeutic or something. It's like something else that's creative, but it's not, I don't know, it's something new. I guess I just like doing new things, so. Somebody says there are some beautiful, helpful animals anatomy models that have normal surface on one side and the muscles on the other side. Oh yeah, I have an anatomy reference that's like that, just human anatomy, but those are very helpful. And that way you can kind of see the muscles, and then how those muscles are softened with the skin and fat on top of them. And generally, you know, people or students will learn about a muscle, and then they're like, oh, now I know that this muscle exists, and they'll put it into their sculpture, but they don't do it in a way that has the softness and subtlety that shows a real solid understanding. Like if you really understand the muscles, then you can, and the pose, then you can make it look like relaxed. Like for this one, I didn't want the arms. There were some parts of the pose where the arms looked like they're like flexing, or that it was a tense pose. But this should be relaxed. Like the arms shouldn't be totally engaged in this pose. That would kind of distract from what the sculpture is, which is kind of a, like I imagine Christ is kind of showing his hands, but then also like putting his hands out for an embrace, for a hug, and that's kind of what I wanted the feeling of the sculpture to be. And so if you understand the anatomy, you might be tempted to just like go in and define every muscle and every joint and tendon and make it look very anatomical. And if you did that, you know, you could kind of distract from the feeling that you want to get across in the sculpture. And so I think some anatomical details can be distracting. So you just have to be careful and make sure that you're representing the anatomy in a way that goes along with whatever you want the message of the sculpture to be, or the point of the sculpture, the purpose of the sculpture. You want it to be able to fulfill it. And I think like people that sculpt but they don't understand anatomy, or they don't understand proportion or gesture, those things that you don't understand are also distracting. Like it's distracting from the sculpture when you can't represent it in a way that feels natural. And so it's important to learn and to master the craft, because that allows you to communicate whatever message you're trying to get across in a way that feels more, in a way that is more clear, because you don't have all the distractions, like every mistake or every glaring detail or every weird feature that's not, that just like pulls people's attention away from whatever you're sculpting. Those things are distractions, and you want whatever your message to be clear. So that's why I think, you know, learning technique is so important. Learning the like the how-to of building up the masses and everything, and then the style. You know, the style shouldn't distract from whatever message you're trying to get across. Let's see. I'm just trying to. So you can see here, I'm trying to soften things up. Maybe I'll come in with a loop tool and just kind of pull the muscles down a little bit. If I feel like they're, you know, that the arms are maybe a little bit too thick, then I can come in those high areas and just kind of pull down that form. And here I'm coming along the form. I'll maybe come along the form to get it to where I want as far as the amount of mass goes. And then I'll come across the form, because I don't want to leave it, because these tool marks coming down along the form, they don't look as good as if you take your time and go across the form. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a sec. But going across the form is really what gives the softness and subtlety and suppleness of a lifelike sculpture. let's see, I feel like, let's see, feel like I am pulling things. I'm going to come across, and I want to keep the gesture of the arm. I'm just trying to thin things out just a little bit because it still feels a little bit thick, a little bit bulky in the arms. Somebody's asking, what's your favorite scripture? That's a good question. That's a really good question. Let's see. I don't know if I could I don't know if well, I could talk about. I don't know if I could give a favorite one off the top of my head. I'd have to maybe think about it a little bit, but let's see. But I really like. Well, so I'll just go over some of the ones that we're going over as a family right now. There's so Luke 2, 10 through 12. That one talks about when the angels have come to the shepherds in the fields, and that's kind of the communication, what the angel is saying to those shepherds. And it says, and the angel said unto them, Fear not, for I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. A Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And what's next? And this shall be a sign unto you: you shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. So that's there's a list of scriptures that we tried to go over as a family, and that's one that we wanted to do around Christmas time, and I like that one. So I'd say, I don't know, that's probably not my favorite. I'd probably have to think about that. There's a lot of good scriptures in Proverbs and other areas that I could do, but for right now, that's the one that comes to mind because we've been doing it as a family, and I like memorizing scriptures. I think it's a good way to kind of take one thing and solidify it just a little bit more, because when you memorize it, it's like it's yours, like adds to your like becomes part of you when you memorize something. Whereas if you just read something once, it's really just reading it once, it's really not a part of you. But if you memorize it, and if you can recall it when something comes up, then that really makes it more of a part of you. So that's something that I liked doing when I was little. We would memorize scriptures as a family, and I think it's a great thing to do. So that's the scripture that comes to mind. But there's so many, there's so many great scriptures. There's also another one, let's see, that says, There hath no temptation taken you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. That one is, the scripture is found in 1 Corinthians 10:13. So that one's a good one. That one's kind of hard. Because we all know that we're not perfect. But that scripture says, well, there's no temptation. There's nothing that you shouldn't do, but you kind of want to do. There's no temptation that is beyond what is within your power to withstand. Like basically you can say no to any temptation, but we don't. We choose to sin. We choose to make mistakes, and so it's a hard scripture, but it's a good one to remember, that we actually do have the power, when we want to do something, or when something's convenient, or if we don't want to do something that we know we should do, we actually have the power to make that choice. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes I forget that, and we just think that whatever the temptation is, whatever the tendency or the habit or the compulsion that we've built up over time, that we no longer have control over ourselves. But that scripture is saying, no, there's no temptation that you have that that you can't, that you don't have the power to overcome. So that's another scripture that I like. And I think, some people are like, oh, can't get into that religious, like faith-based stuff, just because it seems too illogical. But when you describe the concepts in, religious doctrine and things in a way that's more common speak, like common language, and people are like, oh yeah, I experienced that. I know that there's things that like I do that I shouldn't do, but I still choose to do them. Like that's just a part of human nature, and I think that's something that religion kind of gives you the framework to understand that, and a justification for that fight. Whereas if there's no, like if you have kind of a nihilistic view of the world where there's no good, there's no evil, everything's just kind of opinion, and it doesn't really matter what you do because once you're dead, you enter into nothingness, and nothing you do in this life ultimately matters because basically the best person that ever lived on the world and the worst person, their ultimate fate is exactly the same because they just turn into nothing. If that's your view of how reality is, then there's no motivation. There's no logical reason for the motivation and the discipline that comes from self-improvement and trying to avoid those temptations. It's all just basically, well, why don't we give in to those temptations? Why not? And so I think the religious framework of saying, oh, actually we do have a creator, God, and he actually did create a plan for us, and there's a reason that we're here, and we actually have a way to overcome these difficulties in life and receive benefits from the sacrifice of Jesus Christ is what I believe. Then it makes that fight against our natural tendencies, our natural kind of the natural man inside of us that's maybe not the best person, the person that just wants to do what feels good in the moment. There's a justification, a logical justification for that reason, and we all know that we should be better than what we are. So I like having that logical justification behind that fight for self-improvement. Somebody says mine is Psalms 23. When my grandmother was alive, it used to read it together. I can memorize it by heart. Well, I don't have it up, so I'd love to hear it if you put it in the comments. I'll read that. But yeah, there's many great scriptures. So let's see. So you can see that the forms are starting to soften a little bit. They're looking a little bit better. I'm gonna come across now. Still might be a little bit bulky. We'll see. We'll see how I'm feeling in a bit. Let's see. I want to. There's the muscle of the forearm that kind of comes down and then over. I'm gonna make this really exaggerated so you can see what I'm talking about. This forearm muscle that comes down, and I'm seeing that in the reference there's a harder transition here, so it's kind of a sharp transition in this area, and then it softens as it moves out very quickly. Somebody's asking, in a previous video you said that you like to keep the figures you sculpt with in the modeling clay and not reuse the clay. Do you do anything to preserve them? I don't, so I prefer just to use a clay that doesn't dry out. So, and some of the clays like Chavant NSP, it gets kind of like a waxy finish on the surface, but it's still usable. You just have to, just takes a little bit to kind of warm up the clay and get through that surface, but it almost gets its own like waxy dry finish So you do have to realize that that does happen, um, or that can happen. And if that's something you don't want, then you might just put up like a plastic bag over it or something. But this clay that I got from Dollar Tree, the non-dry modeling clay, it gets a little bit shiny, so it looks a little oily. When you leave it for a while, it loses kind of the matte finish. I think you can kind of see some areas that I haven't touched yet that are a little bit more like shiny, like the portrait is a little bit more shiny than the arm that I'm working on, and that just comes from letting the clay alone for a while. So they behave differently, but for the most part, I haven't had an issue with them like not lasting. I know there are some clays that start to actually like separate over the years. I guess I haven't had any sculptures for like, more than 5 or 10 years, which is probably what you'd have to have them for to know if the clay is gonna like start separating or be ruined or something. But eventually when I'm have the resources, I'd like to maybe make some more casts and then be able to get bronzes of different sculptures and then I wouldn't need to keep usually the original is doesn't survive the mold making process. I guess it can if you're careful, but usually not. Somebody says, creating something with my mind and my hands and knowing that my stuff is standing on shelves somewhere in the world, even when I'm dead, really gives me the feeling of happiness and meaningfulness. Well, I think that's great. I think life is meaningful, and I think every I think every artist kind of has that sense that there is something transcendent about art, about creating beauty. There is something, what would you say? Yeah, transcendent. So something that's more than the material, because otherwise, there'd be no reason that the clay in its original form or in the earth, like why is that inferior to a sculpted work of art? And I think it's inferior because it's better to create a beautiful work of art. That's better. And the reason that it's better is because it points us to something beyond the material. Points us to the what I think is a fact that we're not just random atoms bouncing around in an indifferent universe, that there's actually more to life than atoms, that there's a spiritual reality to life. And I think that artists, whether they're conscious of it or not, they're kind of participating in that conversation, creating something from material that says that we are more than material. And that's why a great work of art can be so valuable, is because it points us towards that transcendent reality, and we have a sense of it. We just have a sense of what is beautiful, what is meaningful. I think that that's great. Somebody's asking, do you still have that cool smooth skull? I do, but I've tried to make mold and cast it, but the molds that the casts that I've made have not come out very good. So that's why I haven't like added it to my online store or anything. But and most people aren't willing to spend the money on something like that, though I'd like to do some more casts. Maybe I just need to redo the mold. Because that was one of my favorite designs. I really liked how that skull turned out. It's kind of like a simplified, abstracted skull, life size, and it was a fun project. But it's hard to know, it's it was kind of a study, an example, a demo for the portrait sculpting course. And I think there's not a lot of people that follow me that are interested in you know, paying a couple $100s for an actual work of art. They just want to learn the skill. They want to learn the how-to of it. So, but I do want to sell more actual sculptures and things. How to sculpt figures without an armature by using wood sticks. Please tell if you have any tutorials available. Yeah, there's a course on Proco.com that's taught by Leroy Transfield, and he uses natural clay and he uses a metal rod that's stuck into a piece of wood, and that's all he uses for his armature. And that allows him to do a sculpture, something like this, and then he can mold and cast it, or he can fire it in a kiln by removing the rod once the sculpture starts to set up, and he's able to save his sculptures permanently, the original sculptures. And so I really like that method. I don't have access to a kiln, so that's why I haven't started doing that. But that is something that I'd like to do once I can get a kiln. Is do exactly what he was doing and fire the originals so that I don't have to keep them in a soft clay. And then you can still make a mold and cast them if you wanted to. But he does his gesture sketches like that. So I'd recommend if you go to proco.com/Leroy, he has a little course, mini master demo where you can see his method for doing that, and it's a great course. He's one of the great sculptors alive today, and so I definitely think that his little mini course is worth checking out. Somebody says nice. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Let's see. Somebody else says same. I really love the skull too. Yeah, it was. I really like that one. I'll have to see if I can make it permanent. Maybe I could do a little Kickstarter or something to try to sell some of them. But it's, you know, it's hard. It's hard to market artwork. There's not a lot of people that want to purchase a skull, and I'd have to charge. You know, I have to charge enough to make it worth making, and sometimes that's hard. You ever think about getting into 3D scanner? Their price has gone down a lot, and you can scan and then do 3D printing of your sculptures. I guess I haven't, though. That's something maybe I should look into. My brother has a 3D scanner, and some other people I know, and I know that they can be really fun, and I'm sure that there's advantages to that. And so maybe I just need to do that at some point. And the technology keeps getting better. So yeah, maybe I will get one to try to do stuff. But usually, you know, you still, even if you 3D print something, you still need to make a mold and cast it if you want to do many copies. Usually it ends up still being cheaper to do that. Though I don't know, maybe the 3D printing is getting cheap enough to where it's feasible to do it through 3D printing. But yeah, that'd be cool. It's a way to copy some of the work, and then people can choose the size that they want, or something like that. Or I can sell the design as a 3D scan for cheaper. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's see, let me zoom out a little bit and see what I'm thinking. I'm going to move the references down off the table because I just feel because the cord, I want to be able to turn the sculpture around without pulling the cord out. or pulling the charger out. Oh, I guess I could just unplug it. Let's do that. Obviously, let's do that. Okay, I'm gonna come and kind of do what I was doing with the other arm, with this arm, where I'm thinning it down and working on the details a little bit. Let's do that. I'm gonna switch to this. And this one, this side, I'm not only doing the arm, but also the anatomy of the chest and back, and so there's a little bit more that's going on there. Somebody says even with the scanner you can make a scan and then inverse the sculpture and print the mold, then cast in whatever. Yeah, yep, that's true. And I've seen that, and now you can, you can print basically the molds, and you can use almost any material nowadays. It's really the technology is really advancing when it comes to that stuff. So I guess I should be a part of that. I guess I'm just holding on to the old ways, the old traditions. There, which there's something to be said about that. I think there's people, when they see the process of a traditional sculpture versus creating something in a 3D program, I think they kind of have a sense that one is more valuable than the other, even though you can't really justify that. It's just they can see that the work, that it requires more work to do something in a traditional medium and then transfer that into a permanent sculpture. Whereas if you can have a sculpture just like created in a 3D program and then use a machine to put it in stone, we just have a sense that it's not as valuable as doing it by hand. Which is interesting, that's interesting. Why would the process behind the creation change the value? But I think it does, and I think going back to kind of weaving in some religious ideas, I think that's same with us. Like if we were created through random, unguided chemical processes over time, just an evolutionary process, unguided, no intelligent designer. We weren't created. We're not sons and daughters of God. We're just basically kind of mud sludge that got up and made itself over millennia. Well, then there's nothing intrinsically valuable about us. There's nothing intrinsically valuable about people. But if we were created by the same being that created the universe, and we were created with a purpose, and we're his offspring, and there's a God in heaven that actually cares about the choices that we make and loves us just like we love our children, well then, then that's then we are worth something. We're worth more, even it's the same us. It's the same us, but we're worth more if we were created by God than if we were created by random, unguided, natural chemical processes. And that makes a difference. I think it does make a difference. I think that's part of the reasons I'm convinced that there is a God. It's just because that's what I believe. I already believe it. And the only logical justification for what I already believe, which is that human life has value, the only logical explanation that I've been able to find is a creator of the universe. Let's see, going back to some of the questions, reaching out to Einstein Vega 3D, they sent me a scanner to test it out and do a review. I'm not sure if they would send you one to try out as a loaner. Oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's like it's a review for a sculpting channel. some people like to do that to give YouTubers stuff to try out and play with. Yeah, that might be worth looking into for sure. Let's see, Insta Vega. I'm gonna take a screenshot, just save that. Let's see, how do you use DaVinci Eye? How do you use DaVinci Eye perfectly when overlaying the portrait? Please tell me how you do it perfectly. Well, it's not a perfect tool. So DaVinci Eye is something that allows you to take the reference image and overlay it with the camera of your phone or iPad or whatever you're using the app on. And that way you can kind of check proportions and gesture and everything. But I'd say I like to use it a couple times in the sculpting process to make sure the proportions and gesture are accurate at the beginning. But then I just want to create a good sculpture. So I'd encourage you to well, I usually do it from the front view, get it as aligned as I possibly can, and try. The perspective is difficult, so I think that's what you're referring to, because if your references were taken from a photo or from a camera that is very that's like a fisheye lens where it kind of has a lot of distortion, then it's going to be really hard, and you're going to have distortion in the reference image. And when you look through that reference image to your sculpture, some of that distortion can get in the way of creating a good sculpture. So let's see. So what I do is I just try to align it as much as I can. I try to take my references from about the midpoint of the figure and backed away from the camera, and then I try to have a similar perspective when I'm aligning the reference with the sculpture. But I'll really usually only align the sculpture with the front angle and the side view, like 2 angles, and then I'll just try to create a good sculpture. So that's what I say. If you're trying to use it like from every angle, it becomes difficult, and it is a difficult thing to master. But I mean, you can do it. I mean, technically it's possible, and maybe that's something that would help you as you're working. But I find just trying to create a good sculpture, and once you have the basic gesture and proportions in place, is the thing to go for. Hello, Joseph from Romania. Your contest is good quality plus information. Well, thank you. I'm glad. Hopefully you were able to participate. That competition was really fun. We got the prizes to the winners, and so I'm looking forward to the next one, which will probably be sometime in the spring of 2025. I'd like to do more of those. And so that might mean that we need to reduce the prizes a little bit, or we need to get more sponsors. So if you guys know of people that would be willing to sponsor those types of online sculpting events, let me know, because I'd love to do more. But yeah, it was fun. And I did a video critiquing some of the sculptures, giving you guys some tips, and so that'll probably go up on the Proco 3D channel pretty soon. Hopefully this month, though the people over at Proco are pretty busy this month. So, but hopefully it'll be able to go up this month, so you guys can kind of see some of the common mistakes that I saw and things that would maybe make your sculptures a little bit better for next time. But yeah, I really enjoy those types of competitions. I think they're a great thing to participate in, and they're fun to host. I like doing that. Though the judging is tricky, you know, there's people in the comments are like, oh, I wouldn't have chose the sculptures you chose for the prizes, and I'm like, yeah, that's how it always goes. So I'm even considering doing like where you guys that participate in the competition judge over on Proco.com by just liking the sculptures that you feel deserve the top spots, and then we can just see which sculptures, you know, were the winners by how many people like those. That's not a perfect system either, you know, but maybe that would be a way to at least get some of the people less upset in the comments section, which, you know, that's fine. When people are upset, that's fine. But I do want it to be something where people don't feel like, oh, you know, it's rigged, you know, the system's rigged because you're choosing these sculptures, and it should have been these other ones. I don't want people to feel that way. I want people to feel like, oh yeah, this is a good way. So I'm just trying to make those competitions better. So we'll see how it changes going forward. Somebody says, but who or what created God then? And that's a common retort from atheists, people that believe that we weren't created because that would require God to be created. And I'd say that there's a couple possible answers. There is the belief in God as the creator of the universe suggests that something can be eternal. So something can be eternal. God can be eternal in that he doesn't need to be created because he's eternal. He's outside of time and space, outside of created things, and he's the uncaused cause that created us. So that's one argument just for deism, for belief in God. And another possible answer is that God, we are sons and daughters of God, and so how God is, maybe he was similar to us, and maybe we can progress and become similar to God. And that's another possible thing, is that there's other lineage, that there's a lineage, just like we have a lineage, we have ancestors that go back, that there could be a lineage to God. Now I find that argument to be less convincing than the idea that there's an uncreated creator, that there's a creator outside of creation. But I find both of those more plausible than the idea that that basically mud turned into us. If you just wait a really long time, then mud turns into people. Yeah, I don't find that to be realistic at all. I find that to be kind of a silly idea. And there's not a lot of evidence that unguided evolution, God might have used an evolutionary process in creating us. I don't see anything wrong with that possibility, that God could have taken and formed us slowly over millennia, and it doesn't even necessarily conflict with scriptural views depending on how you interpret the scriptures, because it says that God created Adam from the dust of the earth. So that's basically you could say that that's an evolutionary process. He took it and shaped it over millennia. That's a possibility. But, it's also a possibility that happened exactly as it did, as it says in the scriptures, that it was more literal. And so I'm open to both of those, but what I think is less likely, what makes less sense to me, is that mud turned into people. I just don't buy that mud created DNA. Like the complexity of even the simplest life is so much more complex than the device that you're watching this on, your iPhone or whatever you're consuming this on. One cell inside of even the simplest life form is way more complicated than your phone. And if you found a phone in the desert or some type of similar technology that was able to work and had a purpose, and you could see that there was digital information, even if you didn't understand how to read that information, but you can see that there was some sort of coding inside, and there's hardware. It's very complex. If you saw that, then you'd be like, oh, there was a engineer that created this. There was some sort of intelligent being that made this, because it doesn't appear to be something that could have come about through erosion or whatever natural, or wind, or whatever natural processes are at play on Earth. It's more than that. It's a machine. It's something that works. And so when I see this type of machinery in living organisms, then I think, oh yeah, well then it was probably created by a designer. That just makes more sense to me. Just makes more sense. And then you could say, well, but you have to understand, everything about that designer. And to that I say, well, I don't really need to understand everything. I don't think it's given to us to be able to understand everything in this life. We can understand some things, and we can make the best logical, we can make the inference to the best explanation, or how we see it as the best explanation. And we can use our minds and our faculties of reason to reach conclusions. And I think even in academia, there's a lot of people that are admitting now that the evolution that you're taught in school of the primordial soup that turned into simple life forms, and then those simple life forms turned into us, like there's really not as much evidence for that as they make it sound like. It's not something. It's like it's like finding a dictionary with thousands and thousands of words, and then being like, oh, this was probably created through like a tornado that came and took the ink and the paper and then put it all together into a dictionary. And it's like, well, that's very unlikely that it happened that way. And I think the same thing with life. It's very unlikely that it just created itself from natural, unguided processes. Somebody's saying wrong race. Yeah, I actually talked about that at the beginning of the other one, that there's people that they're always obsessing about the race of Christ, that they say, oh, he doesn't look like that. And well, to that I'd say, well, show me a picture. Show me a picture of what you think Christ looked like. And I think it is totally fine for people to represent Christ in a way that's familiar to them. I don't think there's anything wrong with people representing what's familiar to them. There was an artist that was talking about this, that he was feeling guilty. He was feeling guilty because he looked at the studies that he'd done, and they were all of white people. They were all white noses. He was talking about noses specifically, that they're all white, like these white noses. And that he felt bad because that was just like a racism on his part. So now he had to sculpt, more African-looking noses, or more Chinese, or whatever it is. But I'm just like, well, if that's what's familiar to you, if those are what the noses of the people that are around you look like, there's nothing wrong with representing noses that way, with saying, oh, this is familiar to me, so I'm going to sculpt what's familiar to me. Now, I'm using myself as a reference. I don't think Christ looked like me. I don't think he certainly didn't look exactly like me. He probably didn't look like me at all. But that's what's familiar to me. And there's a scripture that talks about, can you see his image in your countenance? Or maybe it's a hymn. Talks about, can you see his image in your countenance? Like, if he were to come, would you see him as familiar to you? And I think that's what's important. People that are obsessed about the race of Christ, it's like, of Jesus Christ, I don't see that as an important issue. He was probably tanner than me. He was probably darker skinned. He was, in a part of the world where, there's was not super European in features, and that's fine. He had probably Jewish features, and I do have some Jewish ancestry, but not a ton. So, but I think it's fine. It's fine. I don't obsess about if he was darker, that's fine. If he looked totally different than me, that's fine. I'm just sculpting what's familiar. and I'm not really obsessed about the race that he was, only that he was the Son of God, which is what's actually the important thing. His race isn't even mentioned. I think the only mention of his description was that he was not what is it? Something along the lines that he's not handsome in the way that would cause people to desire him. He wasn't the best looking. He wasn't like a model. He wasn't like a. And I think, oh, okay, well then I could be, I could use myself as a reference for that, because I'd put myself in that category. I'm not like a male model, super attractive, super handsome. But I'm sculpting him as something that's familiar, something, and it doesn't, like the portrait doesn't look even exactly like me, though I use myself as a reference, and I can still change it. So yeah, I'm not, the people that are obsessed with the race narrative, what race, I just don't find that to be an interesting, it's just not interesting. Just like, I don't know, who cares? Who cares? Mostly it's people that are saying that he was represented too white. They really don't like when, anybody is represented as too white. And I just think, well, a lot of the people that are representing, that have made representations of Christ, that's the culture that they came from. And they sculpted or they painted what was familiar to them. They sculpted Christ in a way where maybe he was somebody that they could see, walking down the street, that he wouldn't have looked like a stranger to them. And that's how they saw him. I think there's nothing wrong with portraying Christ in that way. Even people that portray Christ as African. Now, he was Jewish, so we know kind of the basic ethnicity that he was. So he almost certainly wasn't African. But that's something that you see. And I don't see people getting as upset about that. I think those people are also just representing Christ in a way that's familiar to them. If that's how they prefer to see Christ, I think that's fine. And we'll find out in the end, what he looks like. Everybody will find out. Somebody says, notice it's a very beautiful sculpture, but I can't help thinking of Jesus' sculpture looks a lot like Jeff Bridges. I'm not familiar with Jeff Bridges. I don't know who that is. But no offense taken, because I don't know. But I'm not super good with names. Somebody's asking, do you have a favorite student? Oh, that's a tough question. Well, I don't know a lot of my students. I wish, if I was taught using traditional methods where I'm in a classroom and I'm able to see you guys, interact with you face to face, then I could probably answer that. But because I'm mostly online, I don't even know what most of my students look like or have any interaction with them or anything. So it's kind of hard to judge. I see your guys' work sometimes, and I like seeing progress. So I guess the answer is no. I guess I don't have a favorite student, though. If I was able to teach in person, which I'd like to do. There's something better about teaching in person than online, though it's hard to get going. And now, being in Iowa, I'm so far from any of the major art centers that maybe it would be difficult. But maybe I need to set up something where I could go travel to New York and do a workshop, or travel to California and do a workshop, and that way I'd be able to be where more people are. But that's something that I haven't set up yet. But I'd love to meet you guys and get to the point where I could have a favorite student, somebody that's I'm like, oh yeah, I like, this student is coming from and where they're going. Oh, Big from Big Lebowski, Tron, and other movies. Oh, okay, yeah, I think I. Okay, yeah, I could see that maybe a little bit. The features. I could see that. I think I need to soften this also. See, I'm gonna come and work on the chest a little bit. Sometimes it's hard to get into the where exactly I want to be. Let's see. I feel like soften that up. Somebody's asking, what do I think about Islam? Well, I don't think it's true. Otherwise, I would be a Muslim. So I think it's a misguided religion. I don't like the fruits. So Christ says, by their fruits ye shall know them. And from what I've seen, I don't like the fruits of what I've seen from countries that have Sharia law, where I feel like the women are treated in a way that I deeply disagree with. You know, I've seen, you know, there's videos on how to of people who believe in Islam showing, like, you know, the proper method to slap your wife or things like that. And then also, you know, there's Islamic countries that are now changing the age of consent to 9 years old so that there can be child marriage, and I find that deeply disturbing. I find that to be very, you know, that's pedophilia, and I don't agree with that at all. So I guess I see it as a false religion, that their idea of God, or Allah, as they would say, I don't believe that that's how the creator of the universe is. But again, if I believed it, then I would be Muslim. But one of the things I dislike about it is that it's very that they want to use force, and I believe that God gave us agency because we can choose, so He gave us the ability to choose. And the idea, you know, it's a very Christian idea that we should allow others to believe as they will. In fact, there's an article of faith in my religion, it's one of my favorites, that says, we believe in God, the Eternal Father, or we claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege, let them worship how, where, or what they may. So it's a very, basically, we're going to worship God in the way that we see fit, and we will allow others to do the same. And I think that that's within the understanding that God did give us the ability to choose. And that's something that Islam does not share, that they believe that the infidel or the unbeliever should be conquered and then forced to believe in Islam, or destroyed. You know, they believe religious jihad is part of the religion, where they believe that Jews and Christians specifically are basically the enemy of their of their religion, and the the countries where Christians are persecuted the most are generally heavily Islamic. So I disagree with it. I don't find it to be a convincing religious worldview based on the fruits. Now, people could say, oh, well, you don't really understand Islam, and maybe that's true, but I can only go based on what I've seen from the way people have implemented Islam in places where it's the majority belief, where it's the primary religion. And I don't like how those places, I don't like the fruits of that religion. So I like the fruits of Christianity that have created, the United States was deeply, the founders were all Christian and believed in Christian principles, and it was based on the idea of human rights, which is a Christian idea that we're created in the image of God, and therefore we have certain inalienable rights that adhere to us, even if the government doesn't recognize those rights. And the reason that we have them is because they were given to us by God. That's the only logical source of rights. Because if the government gives you rights, then you don't have rights. You just have privileges, things that the government allows you to do. But if God gives you rights, then even if the government says that you don't have the right to, say, pray the way that you want, or worship the way that you want, then if the government says you don't have the right, you don't have the right. If there's nothing more than government, if the government is the most powerful thing in the world, then you have no basis to say my rights are being infringed, because the rights come from the government. And I don't believe that. I believe that the rights come from God. Which method do you use for an armature on the Proco 3D one video or Andrew Joseph one? I show a couple different methods. So there's a video on my YouTube channel of making cheap armatures. So that's one method. There's also a more recent video I did of the simplest method for building an armature. And that one's like really fast. You can make an armature like really quick, and it's not as accurate. And then there's the way on Proco that I teach, which is more precise with where you put the measurements of the body and the joints and everything. And I'd say that the method that I use the most, well, I'd say just experiment. I try, if you like building armatures, then I try each one. If you find the method on Proco a little bit complicated, then maybe come back and watch the video on this channel. I think it's just like 3 minutes long on the simplest method, and there's no like audio. It just shows you like how to bend the wire armature, and then you can check the proportions after. But I just think you should know how to make an armature and be familiar with that as a sculptor. That's something I wasn't taught in college, and I think it was a big hole in what I should have been taught, because if you're a sculptor, you should know how to make your own armature. It's just like a basic part of working in traditional sculpting. Even if you don't use an armature, like Leroy doesn't, like I was talking about Leroy Transfield, he's a sculptor that works with just a simple metal rod as an armature to support the water-based clay, so that he can remove the rod as the sculpture becomes a little bit firmer, and then he can fire the whole sculpture intact, and so that's the method that he uses. But I think even in that case, he knows how to build an armature, and he's built ones for the competitions that we've done, just because he understands if he's working with a water-based clay, he can do that. So even people that don't use it on their day-to-day thing, you should know how to create an armature just to support the figure, or even just to use as a reference for proportion or for the pose. So I use all the methods. I'll usually just grab whatever armature I have already made, and if I'm going to make a new one, if I want it to be fast, I'll use the simplest method, which is just basically 3 pieces of wire twisted together, the first 2 twisted together to make the arms and legs, and then the third piece added onto the spine for the head, and that's like pretty basic and works pretty well. See, somebody says, I agree. I believe that if somebody would make a sculpture of Muhammad, some Muslims would try to come for you. Islam does not seem to be friendly and respectful religion. Yeah. One of the parts of their religion is against representation, which they get from I believe it's from where it says in the Ten Commandments that thou shalt not make any graven image or likeness of anything on the earth or in heaven above. And so they use that as a justification to say that art is, that you can't represent people. So all of the artwork in Islam is very geometric. It's like shapes. So it shapes their worldview, has shaped their art. And I don't believe in that interpretation. I think that God was specifically talking about when we put things, when we put material things as a, and we put that in place of the actual existing God. So I don't believe it's just like don't make an idol or don't make a sculpture. I think it means don't confuse that sculpture with the thing that you're sculpting. So there are people in different religions that would create a sculpture and then they would pray to that sculpture. That sculpture would be basically the thing that they pray to. But I mean, as Christians, I don't think that we should do that. I think that, this sculpture of Christ is not something I'm not going to pray to the sculpture. It's just a communication of like this event that happened that points us towards Christ, that points us towards God and his son Jesus Christ, and that's the way I interpret that scripture. So I don't agree with the interpretation of Islam that you just can't create images of people. And you're right that they view that as a serious offense worthy of death if you create a sculpture or a drawing or something of Muhammad. Then they see that as a capital offense, and I don't agree with that. That's why I'm not Muslim. Though I have, I had a student when I taught table tennis at the university. He was great. He was a friend, and he was a devout Muslim at Utah State University, and he would even ask for, let's see, oh, can you guys see? Let me make sure you can see what I'm doing. He would ask for, days off so that he could do a fast or a prayer or things like that. So a devout Muslim, and he was a good friend, but I just disagree with especially those that have the more extreme militant forms of Islam that tend to be more violent. I definitely disagree with that. So that's kind of my view. But I think a lot of people unfairly, they say, well, they group all religions together, and I don't think that that's accurate. I think you have to treat them based on their fruits, based on the results that come from the people that believe that. Like, how do people turn out? And there's always going to be people that, even in religions that teach good things, that they still make bad choices. That's just a fact of human nature. But does the religion basically cover for those choices or encourage those bad choices? And if it does, then it's a bad religion. It's not a good worldview. It's not a good belief system if it encourages bad behavior, and so that's what I think about that. Let's see, have you ever used water-based clay before? Yeah, we did. I just recently did a competition. There's a video of the portrait competition, and it's in water-based clay. And did some water-based clay in college and things. I don't like how dusty it is, as it dries out, and I don't have access to a kiln, which would make water-based clay a lot more, which would make water-based clay would make a lot more sense if I was able to fire it in a kiln and make permanent sculptures that I could sell or save as gestures. So if I get, maybe I'd like to get to a kiln eventually. So once I get that, then maybe I will I'll switch and start doing more water-based clay because it's very cost-effective. I mean, it's one of the cheapest clays because it's just, you know, you can get it from the earth. I think there's even a place nearby where I live now where you can go and collect clay and use it for pottery. I'd like to try some of that eventually. I don't know where it is exactly, but I've just heard about it. And so I think that's great. And it's kind of cool to be sculpting with something that's been a sculpting medium for so long. It's like you're participating in a tradition that's thousands and thousands of years old, using the same material that people used a long time ago. So I think there is something cool and kind of that takes part of a grand tradition when you're using natural clay. But I don't like the feel as much. You know, the way it kind of dries out your hands, the moisture from your hands, and gets into your fingernails, and it's just not my favorite when it comes to the feel. But if I could do it and fire it, then that's, you know, a game changer. Basically, I could sell the studies more easily and probably do more. So that is something I'd like to work towards. Let's see. Okay, I think, you know, that was a decent sculpting session. I kind of worked on some of the details of this arm. It's looking a lot better. It was a lot more rough and sketchy at the beginning. Still a long way to go to finish up this sculpture. I'll still probably change. I'll probably stay with the pose, but the details of the face I'll probably still be playing with for a while, and the anatomy and hands and everything still need quite a bit of work. The drapery as well. So it's still got quite a ways to go, but I feel good about this session, and it just takes a long time to get it to where you want it to go. Okay, if you're interested in learning sculpting, then there's a sale going on right now over at Proco.com for the figure sculpting course, which is my main course. That's where I recommend people start. There's also a portrait sculpting course. This is kind of more advanced if you're interested specifically in the portrait. And if you're interested in the hands, which are very tricky, there's even a hand sculpting course, which is a more recent one, and it's a little bit cheaper than the other courses. And so if you're interested in sculpting, I hope that you'll check out those courses while they're on sale. I think it's the 12 days, but if you just go to the links in the description, then the sale is up on Proco. So I don't even know if you have to enter a code. But if you do, they'll provide the code just over there while the sale's going. So I hope you take advantage if you're interested. And I'm grateful to be here and be able to teach and be able to hopefully motivate you guys to create something that you find worthwhile and that you find to be meaningful. And that's what sculpture and art is all about. And so hopefully you guys can do your own sculptures and create your own works that communicate what you'd like to communicate to the world. And I think that would be a great thing because we need more beautiful things in the world. So thank you guys. Stay creative, stay productive, and hopefully I'll see you again soon in another live stream or in another video.